Thank you for joining me. I'm Tom Booker, the Senior Instructor. This is our Warrior Personal Strength lesson on Indomitable Spirit. And we're talking today about when Fred stood up to the slave breaker. Thomas Auld demanded Fred leave Baltimore and return to Talbot County in 1833. Fred had turned 15 years old. He was growing big enough and strong enough now to work in the fields. Thomas hired Fred out to Edward Covey to work on his farm. Fred would start on January 1st and work for Covey for a whole year. Fred wasn't asked if he wanted to work on Covey's farm. He was a slave and he was expected to do what he was told. Thomas told Fred that a year of hard work and strict discipline would be the making of him. Now, Fred had heard rumors about Edward Covey, and what he heard scared him. Other slaves told Fred that he was harsh, sly, even cruel. He worked slaves hard and beat them frequently. Now that was bad enough. Some whispered that Covey was really a slave breaker. He took disobedient, rebellious slaves from their owners for a year. He mistreated and punished them as they worked on his farm to make them docile and obedient. When they went back to their owners, they wouldn't be any more trouble. When Fred went to work for Covey, he got into trouble almost at once. He didn't know anything about farm work. His first job on the farm was to go out into the woods, cut some firewood, and haul it back to the farm using a cart and a team of oxen. Cutting the firewood went just fine. Fred knew enough about using an axe from helping out in the shipyards to do that. But he had never driven a yoke of oxen before. It didn't help that Buck and Darby, the two oxen, weren't completely trained yet to work together as a team. Going out to the woods, Buck and Darby ran away from him and turned the empty cart over. Fred shouted, "Whoa!" and pulled back on Buck's guide rope, but it didn't do any good. He couldn't control them. Coming back with the load of wood, they ran away again, smashed into the farmyard gate and broke it. Edward Covey was furious with Fred. "I'll teach you to waste time and break gates," he yelled at Fred. He cut 3 long, wiry shoots from a nearby black gum tree. Then he grabbed Fred and held him down and lashed him over and over again with the black gum shoots. Fred didn't know what to do. He had seen other slaves beaten before, but it had never happened to him. He was so scared he didn't try to protect himself. The lashes with the black gum shoots hurt so much he could barely think. He couldn't get away. It seemed to go on forever. He felt helpless and very alone. Pardon me. The year went on like that. Every time Fred made a mistake in the farm work, Covey would punish him. Because he didn't know much about farming, Fred made many mistakes. Fred turned 16 and was growing fast. This made him clumsy and awkward, and he made even more mistakes because of that. Covey punished him for those, too. One Friday in August, Fred was helping to thresh the wheat crop. He was carrying the wheat from the threshing floor to where it would be winnowed from the chaff. He was working hard, and it was a hot, humid summer day. By mid-afternoon, Fred was feeling severely ill. He had a bad headache and was very dizzy. He abruptly collapsed from heat stroke. Fred crawled into the shade of a fence. Covey rushed over and commanded Fred to stand up and get back to work. Fred tried to pull himself up using the fence, but collapsed again. Covey kicked him as he lay on the ground, hit him over the head with a piece of wood, and yelled at him some more. He finally left Fred lying there and took his place in threshing the wheat. When Fred started to feel a little better, he slipped away into the nearby woods. He hid from Covey for the rest of that Friday and all of Saturday. He finally came back to the farm on Sunday. Covey smiled, and he asked Fred how he was doing. He didn't punish on Sundays. But Monday, that would be different. Early Monday morning, Fred was in the stable. He was standing on a ladder, getting hay down from the loft to feed the horses. Covey slipped silently into the stable, then grabbed Fred by one leg and threw him from the ladder onto the ground. He tried to slip a noose around Fred's ankles so he couldn't run away. Then he would beat Fred. That was his plan. Now, Fred understood immediately what was happening. He kicked out of the noose, scrambled away, and got back onto his feet. Covey charged at Fred and struck at him. Fred blocked him, and then they grappled each other. They threw each other around the stable and then worked their way outdoors into the farmyard. Things were different than they had been back in January, and not just because Fred was bigger and stronger than he'd been a few months earlier. Fred was determined that this time Covey wasn't going to whip him. Covey didn't get to injure him, and he wasn't going to injure Covey either. Out in the farmyard, Covey dragged Fred toward a heavy stick he meant to use as a weapon. As he bent over to grab it, Fred got a good grip on his collar and threw him across the farmyard face first into the manure pile. They grappled with each other again. Fred tried to get Covey into a chokehold, but he twisted loose at the last moment. Because Fred was being careful not to injure Covey, the fight went on and on. Fred threw him on the ground several times, but he kept coming back for more. As they grappled together, Covey would ask, "Do you mean to resist, you scoundrel?" And Fred would answer, "Yes, sir." And they would keep going. They were both nearly exhausted when Covey suddenly let go, backed away from Fred. He scolded Fred. "Now, you scoundrel, go to your work. I would not have whipped you half as much as I have had you not resisted." Then he stalked off out of the farmyard. Fred stood in the farmyard, alone and astonished. The fact was, despite his best efforts, Covey hadn't whipped him at all. Fred tried to make sense out of what had just happened. His aim had been to keep Covey from injuring him, not to injure Covey, and he had managed to do just that. They were both sweaty, dirty, sore, and tired, and Covey was covered in cow manure. But no one had been injured. That was what Fred had wanted. Covey had wanted to beat him, and Fred had stopped him. Fred had won by refusing to lose. He had prevailed. During his remaining months at the farm, Covey never tried to beat him again. Many years afterwards, Fred looked back on the fight in the farmyard as a turning point in his life. He didn't know why, on that day, he had resisted Covey, someone who frightened him and who hurt him. But he had stood up for himself, and he had made it stick. He put it this way: I now resolved that however long I might remain a slave in form, the day had passed forever when I would be a slave in fact. Now, we've got some questions about this story and about applying indomitable spirit as a personal strength. The first one: when Buck and Darby ran away from Fred and broke the farmyard gate, Covey was furious. He lashed Fred with black gum shoots to teach him not to break gates. Do you think Covey was applying indomitable spirit as a personal strength? Or was he a bully who wanted to have his own way and liked hurting people? Second one: as they grappled in the farmyard, Fred was determined to keep Covey from injuring him. He was also determined not to injure Covey. After a long, hard struggle, he succeeded. Do you think he was applying indomitable spirit? And finally, after Fred stood up to Covey and grappled with him in the farmyard, Covey never tried to beat him again. Do you think he respected Fred's indomitable spirit? Or was he a bully who couldn't admit that Fred had stood up to him? I'd like you to think over those questions, pick at least one of them, and let me know what you think, what your answer to the question is. Thank you very much for joining me today. Next time, we will talk about how Fred escaped from slavery. And I look forward to seeing you again then.